Your lecturer is Master of Wine Jennifer Simonetti Bryan. Master of Wine Simonetti Bryan is one of only a few hundred people in the world and one of only 26 in the United States to hold this title, the highest in the industry from the Institute of Masters of Wine in London. Having trained thousands of industry experts, she has been featured on Fox News, Fox Business, and in the New York Times and Wine Enthusiast magazine.
Here we have 36 glasses of different wines. Just like people, each wine is distinct and unique. And all we know about these wines is that they're made from different grape varieties, come from different regions, and made from different vintages. Now imagine picking one up. You look at it, you smell it, you taste it, and you say, ah, yes, that's the 2006 Geoffroy Chambertin. And you're right. My name is Jennifer Simonetti Bryan, and I am a Master of Wine. To become a master, I had to pass a blind taste test to identify all 36 of these wines. In case you're wondering, I wasn't blindfolded. A blind test just means that you don't know what you're tasting ahead of time. Perhaps you've never heard of the title, but the Master of Wine is the highest wine title to achieve in the world. It's legendary for its exhausting and rigorous difficulty. Just how difficult? Well, the title is awarded by the Institute of Masters of Wine. And between the time of the first exam in 1955, when it was founded, fewer than 300 people worldwide have passed the 4-day exam. Now think about it. In the past 55 years, an average of 5 people a year have mastered all the knowledge required for this title. Although in truth, some years nobody passes. That has an extremely high fail rate. The year that I passed the tasting exam, the pass rate was under 10%. Now, I'm only one of 26 people in the United States to attain the title. Even to get into the program is tough. To apply, you have to be nominated by another Master of Wine. You have to prove that you've got sufficient industry experience and wine education, and you have to complete a wine tasting assignment and essays, among other things. A lot of people think that a Master of Wine is the same thing as a sommelier. Not at all. To clarify, the word sommelier is a widely used French term for a specialist wine waiter or wine steward that works in a restaurant. That's the only place that you're going to find a sommelier. However, you might be surprised to know that there are no requirements to be a sommelier. It can run the gamut from a restaurant owner saying to a waiter, "Hey, you there, put down the menus, because today you're the sommelier," to sommeliers who have really high levels of knowledge and certification. For instance, there's a Master Sommelier program, MS for short, which requires candidates taste and verbally discuss 6 wines to pass the exam. Later in this course, we'll talk with a well-qualified sommelier who took the MS exam, and we'll see him in action. But let's take a minute to talk about what a Master of Wine has to do to attain this title. It's mostly a program of self-study, and it took me years to learn all I needed to for it. Once a year, for 1 week, candidates must meet and take a test in order to test their knowledge and skills. In their second year, if they get a high enough grade, then they're allowed to take the exam. If not, they have to wait a year and try again. If they do really poorly, they may be kicked out and have to wait several years and then have to reapply. The annual week-long program is only given in Bordeaux, Melbourne, and Napa. The candidates are tested and mentored at this time. You can only get to the MW with the help of mentors, and you can't possibly pass the test unless you practice taking the test first. Masters of Wine do all the mentoring and testing, but to get a glimpse into what this is like, come with me to Napa Valley in February 2010, where I'm teaching a group of potential candidates about the fine points of tasting. Notice what's in the room. You see that each candidate has 12 glasses in front of them. They're numbered. The glasses match the numbered bottles you see lined up here. The candidates are doing a blind taste test. For their actual exam, they'll not only have to identify the wine, they also have to answer questions about the wines. They have to demonstrate how they came to that conclusion. Watch in this segment here, where I'm working with them to distinguish between the sparkling wine that comes from Champagne and is called by the same name, and a sparkling wine that comes from Cava in Spain. So how many people identified the first wine as Cava? Okay, good. Okay. And the second wine is Champagne? Very nice, very, very nice. Did you notice that not everyone got these two questions right? The candidates will be taking notes, looking at the color, sniffing the wines, and tasting to try to pin down ways they could come to the right conclusion. For the actual tests, 3 mornings in a row, you have 2 hours and 15 minutes to taste, identify, and write up your answers. Here's an example of a typical question. Identify the variety, country and region of origin, identify the style and method of production, as well as comment on the quality. The questions can pertain to any region, any vintage, any quality level, or any category in the world. And this would be coupled with an explanation of how you came to those conclusions. I developed my own shorthand for each aspect, such as color, aroma, body, and complexity. I also came up with a grid system for taking notes. Because when you've got basically 2 minutes to taste and 9 minutes to write, you've got to be very focused and very fast. On this grid, you'll see Geoffroy Chambertin, a wine I identified at the start of this lecture. Let's take a minute now to look at the steps I went through to identify it. It has a medium pale ruby color, which tells me that this is made from a thin-skinned grape variety, which rules out thick-skinned grape varieties. It's very aromatic, so it tells me it's also a thin-skinned grape variety, but also an aromatic grape variety. And I get elements of strawberry and cherry, and some elements of oak, vanilla, and toast. So it could be Pinot Noir, Nebbiolo, or Grenache or Garnacha. And I smell some mineral notes too, which tells me it comes from the Old World, meaning Europe, as opposed to any place else outside of Europe. And the wine has a high level of acidity and a medium body and moderate level of alcohol, but it tells me that it comes from a cool climate. For the exam, I had to dive into many more characteristics and qualities than this, and certainly more than you're going to need in this course. But I'll be teaching you some of my tasting secrets. We'll be using a tasting card to help you know what to focus on and to use to take notes appropriate for your level of knowledge. You may want to use individual index cards or a tasting journal as you go through each lecture to keep track of the pointers I'll be giving. The system I used, plus, as I mentioned, nearly a decade of study, helped me win the Wiesbaden Tasting Trophy in 2008 for the highest tasting score that year. I traveled to Germany for my prize, visiting Kloster Eberbach and the Steinberg Vineyard. Tasting is only one part of the knowledge required to pass the MW exam. In the 4 daily sessions, you also have to write timed essays to complex, cross-disciplinary questions on all aspects of the field of wine. The first 2 days cover production. So, for example, you might have to identify the major pests and diseases affecting vineyards globally and all of the treatments of them. The third day, you have to discuss questions on the business of wine. I also have a degree in international business, and I have work experience in corporate finance, which definitely helped me understand this aspect. And on the last day, you have to answer questions on contemporary or even philosophical issues. If you pass all these exams, the papers on the 36 glasses of wine, the 4 days of essay tests, then you have to write a dissertation of 10,000 words on an original piece of research. Throughout the time I prepared for the exam, I not only read about and tasted wines literally almost all day, I visited wine regions throughout the world so that I could learn much more deeply about the wine. By traveling to the regions themselves, you get to see the soil and conditions for growing different types of grape varieties. You get to see, to touch, and to taste the grapes so you truly understand the qualities and the characteristics. For example, I was in Chianti. I was able to taste the clone of Sangiovese grapes cultivated by the Antinores. They're smaller, which means they have more color and more flavor, something I had never experienced before I traveled there. You also get to speak to the people who make the wines and learn details unavailable in books. You get to see these firsthand, the effects of diseases like the virus on these grapes in Portugal. After visiting all these regions, and I've been to, at this point, about 35 of the world's greatest regions, nearly all the ones we'll talk about in this course, it's instinctive and natural to compare and contrast them. This is essential in understanding how a wine is made, why it tastes the way that it does, how it impacts the quality, and things we're going to be discussing a lot in these upcoming lectures. So to become a Master of Wine, or MW for short, I've traveled, studied, tasted, compared, and learned about every aspect of wine, from how vines grow to how wines are made, from the simplest jug wine to icon wines worth over $2,000 a bottle, and then how it gets to your dinner table. As an MW, I have a lot to share with you that most people in the industry don't know. By the way, when I passed the MW in 2008, I became one of fewer than 5 people who attained not only that credential, but the highest level of certifications from the Wine and Spirits Education Trust, as well as the Society of Wine Educators. So at this point, you might think that I was raised in a vineyard, or at least in a family that knew all about wine. Nothing could be further from the truth. And believe me, if I could learn about wine, you can learn about wine. I'm an Air Force brat from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Like a lot of people raised in a military family, I was very hardworking and driven to excel. I pushed myself all through school, and by the time I was 25, I was working for an investment bank in London. I was planning on a long, lucrative career in finance, but one day I was at a business lunch that changed my life forever. At this lunch, we were served an herb-crusted salmon and a Sancerre, like this one here. It's a white wine from the Loire Valley in France. We'll be talking about this wine later in the course, but let's take a look at it now. Look that it's a pale straw color. It's extremely aromatic. And it's quite high in acidity. All these things are attributes that I quite honestly didn't pay attention to back then. But what I did pay attention to was what happened to my taste buds when I tasted the Sancerre after tasting the salmon. Now, salmon is a very fatty fish. It creates this oil coating all over your tongue. And the high acidity from the Sancerre cleansed the fat right off my palate. Also, the greenish taste of the herbs on the salmon really helped my tongue focus on the fruit. And when you put all that together with the high acid in the Sancerre, wow, the flavors just popped. The sensation totally knocked me out. All I could think about was this absolutely amazing pairing in front of me instead of my meeting. From that moment on, my eyes were open to an entirely new world of appreciating aromas, flavors, textures, a heightened awareness of these senses and sensations. I was so moved that I left banking and followed my new passion. And that's the world I want to open up for you. Let's take a moment here and just really think about wine for a minute. If you've got a glass there in front of you, pick it up. Look at the color, sniff it, take a sip. When you drink a glass of wine, you're connecting yourself to me, to your friends, to your family, even to your ancestors and the ancients who first grew grapes that can ferment into wine. For example, the wines we drink today link us back to the ancient Assyrians, who grew grapes and made wine in ancient Middle East. Our wines also connect us to the ancient Egyptians. They made some of the first wines recorded in history, and they celebrated wine in their paintings. Even King Tut loved his wine. When Howard Carter opened King Tut's tomb, he found wine jars around King Tut's golden sarcophagus. One of the wines favored by the ancient Egyptians was Mareotis. Its characteristics could be described the same as this wine over here, a German Riesling. We'll taste this later on in the course, but it's pale, so is the Mareotis. It's very aromatic and fragrant, just like the Mareotis. And it's sweet, just like that wine. The ancient Romans celebrated the wine god Bacchus at a festival called the Bacchanalia, where they danced, they drank wine, and indulged in all there is to celebrate in life. One of the wines they cherished was called Passum. It was made from half-dried grapes left on the vine. Well, we're going to be tasting a very similar wine called an Amarone, although the ancient Romans would have watered it down. Here we have it right here. It's deep in color. It smells of dried fruit. And this is a very powerful, rich, full-bodied wine. Even in the Bible, there are over 256 references to wine. And of course, wine is a major symbol within Christianity. Wine in ancient times was used for everything from dressing wounds. Do you remember the story of the Good Samaritan? That was dressing wounds, to sanitizing water, to treating heartburn. As you learn how to distinguish the characteristics of wine, you'll be sharing the experiences of the monks from the Middle Ages who discovered the pleasure of a wine coming from this specific vineyard versus this one over here, and realized when one year's wine was much better than another year's. They kept amazing tasting notes and records about their wines, what was quality to them and what wasn't quality. It's because of their efforts that we became aware of the more complex interaction among grapes, soil, weather, harvesting, and aging. Even Benjamin Franklin, one of America's founding fathers, was an enormous wine enthusiast. He said, "Wine makes daily living easier, less hurried, with fewer tensions and more tolerance." Now, how many of you have thought exactly the same thing? Franklin loved to kick back and talk about wine, perhaps the same way you do with your family and friends. Although wine may taste a little different now due to modern technology, the principles of making wine are exactly the same. You're embarking on a journey, then that had its beginning thousands of years ago. Some of you may remember the 60 Minutes TV special in 1991 on what was called the French paradox. The show proposed that red wine consumption decreases the incidence of cardiac disease. But how accurate is this? Let's take a minute to hear from Dr. Patrick Farrell, a specialist in internal medicine and a master of wine, as he talks about wine and health. So, Dr. Farrell, please tell us a little bit about the health benefits of white wine.
The key with white wine is moderation. Immoderate wine drinking can lead to bad things like heart disease, breast cancer, other forms of cancer. But moderate wine drinking, 1 or 2 glasses a day, can decrease your risk of heart disease.
Now, how does that compare to red wine?
Red wine is intrinsically different than white wine. Okay? As you know, white wine is made just from the juice, no skins, no seeds. When you make red wine, you use skins and seeds, and that gives you color, but also gives you tannins and texture. And it turns out the tannins come from a class of compounds called polyphenols. Big word. Polyphenols are great for your health, decrease your risk of heart disease, macular degeneration, and even Alzheimer's disease. Most of the studies from the 1990s and early 2000s focused upon the amount of wine that somebody consumed. There was an Italian study about 10 years ago that looked at the timing of wine. And it turns out, if you drink wine with food, it turns out that that's much healthier for you than just drinking it as a cocktail. Though drinking it as a cocktail is fun, it's far better for you to have your red wine with your dinner.
After hearing from Dr. Farrell, it probably won't surprise you to learn that after the news about the French paradox, consumption of red wine increased 44% in the United States. In fact, American wine consumption has been on the rise every year for the last 15 years. While in 2009, Italy was the world's biggest wine consumer, followed by France. But the U.S. is predicted by some to be the world's largest wine consumer by 2012. So we might be following the words of another founding father, Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote, "Good wine is a necessity to me." We've talked about the wine culture and how it developed historically, but even wine lover Thomas Jefferson would be surprised at how the culture of wine plays out nowadays in America. We have tasting seminars, wine clubs, wine bars, specialty stores, tasting hours, tasting tours, a host of places to drink and learn about wine, besides in our own living rooms or kitchens. Although you may like wine, you may regard wine culture as snobbish or elitist or a private club. While there are definitely some snobs out there, let me let you in on a little secret. The more you know, the less snobbish you become. When I was first starting to learn about wine, and I knew just enough to be dangerous, I found myself saying the most ridiculously snobbish things. But after the whole MW process, I've been completely humbled by wine. Though I have a BMW, I'm not too snobby to say, this is the 2006 Geoffroy Chambertin, while I have it with my hamburger. Wine is humbling. You have to remember that you're not going to learn everything all at once. And we all make mistakes. I'm here to guide you through the learning processes as someone who's had embarrassing moments myself. So for example, during this course, we're going to be talking about how to properly taste wine, and one of the things you're going to learn how to do is spit wine out. It may seem very odd to you because you think, I'm here to learn about wine, why should I spit it out? Simply put, when you're really learning about wine, you're trying and comparing several wines side by side, as we will be in this course, and spitting keeps you from getting drunk. The first time I was in a wine class and I had to spit, I thought to myself, this is disgusting. I can't do this. And I ended up spitting the wine in my lap. Again, another humbling experience. But your mistakes and the ones that I've made for you will help you through becoming a better taster. Wine culture has some wonderful attributes. When I was first starting out in my wine studies, I had no money to travel all around the world. But when I took a sip of my favorite Chianti Classico, it transported me to Italy. I'd take a sip and then point to a map and think, what's in my glass came from this spot, thousands of miles away. I could picture the castle. I could feel the Tuscan sun on my face, and I could smell the basil and oregano in the air. It worked for me, and it might work for you. Wine can also connect us to very powerful memories. They say that the sense of smell has the strongest ties to distant memories. One red wine from Portugal that smells of violets may remind you of happy memories of dinners at your grandmother's house or a special celebration with friends. Once you start fine-tuning your sense of smell through this course, you'll be amazed by the memories and thoughts that come to your mind. I worked for a while in a wine shop, and the accountant would sometimes taste along with us. Once, when we were tasting a Muscadet, a white wine from the Loire, just like the Sancerre, she said, it smells like the sea air, like when I was walking with my boyfriend along the beach. Now, you might laugh, like people did that day, but she was absolutely correct. A Muscadet can have a certain sense reminiscent of the brininess one finds in sea air, and that's the memory it recalled for her. Now, did you know that wine is generally considered healthier to drink than beer or spirits? It's also considered more sophisticated and increasingly more popular. And the number of wine drinkers abound as the millennial generation, now aged between 16 and 33, and there's about 70 million of them, are embracing wine at a much earlier age than other generations. So not only do you belong to an expanding group, it's a group that bridges generations. But what kind of wine consumer are you? Constellation Brands is a conglomerate that owns several wineries, including Robert Mondavi Winery, which we'll be visiting in this series. Constellation conducted a consumer study and identified different categories of wines and consumers. Listen to some of their questions and see if you can identify yourself as one of their types, although you may find you belong to several of these categories. Now, are you the type that likes wine but doesn't know what to buy and is overwhelmed by the sheer volume on the shelves in the stores? Are you open to advice but completely frustrated when there's no one to help you pick something out? If so, you're one of the consumers that they categorize as overwhelmed. Do you know what you like to drink but hate the buying process? If so, you might be what they call a satisfied sipper. If either of these two things describe you, you're in good company, as these two categories describe almost 40% of all wine drinkers in the US. In this course, we're going to expand your horizons and make you more confident when walking through those huge wine aisles or looking at those thick wine lists. Now let's take a look at another type of consumer. Do you consider yourself knowledgeable about wine? Do you entertain often at home with friends? Do you love looking at wine ratings and reviews? Maybe you have your weekend wines versus your everyday wines. If this is you, you're an enthusiast, and you're in the enthusiast category. Although this is the smallest group, we hope to channel your inner bargainer and help you to recognize wines that you don't have to pay a lot to get a great bottle for. And we also hope that our satisfied sippers and overwhelmed wine drinkers will grow comfortable and confident enough to enjoy wines with the same passion and verve as the enthusiast. Now let's try a few more questions. Do you like to be the first to try out a new wine? Do you like to check out restaurant wine lists before you dine out so you can research ratings first? Do you view wine as a status symbol? If this is you, you could be an image seeker. Maybe you fit into the final category. Do you love wine but take pleasure in finding absolutely the best deal? If so, you might be a savvy shopper. And with this course, you'll have a chance to introduce your friends to new wines at a bargain. Wherever you fit, as you go through this course, you'll develop the ability and the tasting experience to navigate toward your own desired expertise. My goals for this course are to share with you some of the tools I use and to give you the opportunity to see and experience the beauty of wine. We'll be tasting interactively throughout this course. And at the end of each lecture, I'll make suggestions for the wines that we'll be tasting in the next lecture. We'll learn about how wine is made, the major grape varieties, and then travel the world together to learn how regions influence the wine we're drinking. If you don't want to taste with us, that's okay. You'll still learn a lot. But if you do, be sure to have the remote handy so that you can pause and taste with us. When I was preparing this course, many times in working with the team at the teaching company, I was comparing wines, going back and forth between them, and that really helped everyone understand what I was talking about. Think about it. Most of the time, we only taste one wine at a time, as if it's in its own little vacuum. The experience of wine is so different and so amazing when you're sniffing and tasting several wines together. That's one of the reasons we need multiple wines for each lecture. The differences really pop out and come alive in the glass. You may also want to think about watching these lectures with friends so that you can share the shopping as well as the wine. This will give you a chance to compare notes with them, which can be a lot of fun. And at the end of the course, we'll talk about some ideas for tasting parties. Now let's take another look at the 36 glasses of wine I mentioned at the start of the lecture. It's a long road to get here. From knowing nothing about wine to the Master of Wine took me 10 years. So perhaps this course will interest you in pursuing your wine studies further. But even if that's not your goal, this will be a wonderful journey for you. Now see these wines here? By a quarter of the way through this course, I'll have shown you the differences between high acid wines like Riesling or a high tannin wine like Cabernet Sauvignon, and you may already be able to say which you prefer. I'll also share with you key predictors that will help you figure out which wines you will like and what others will like. Halfway through this course, you'll have learned about the classic noble grape varieties. So that means if you had this Burgundy in front of you, like I had here, you would, with practice, be able to see the color, see that it's a thin-skinned grape variety. You might even be able to distinguish a particular grape variety like Muscat for its intense aromatics, or be able to tell the growing conditions, how it influenced the flavor. By the end of this course, you'll have learned strategies for buying wines within your price range, whether that means $10 or over $100 a bottle, and pairing those wines with your holiday or everyday meals. You'll have the tools to be able to pick up wines for you, your friends, and your family, and will be able to enjoy them together. So welcome to the journey. Up next, we'll discuss a professional taster's toolkit, how we taste, why we taste, and understanding your individual palate. For that lecture, I'll be using 2 whites, and I suggest that you have 1 or 2 of your favorite wines on hand. Let's see if we can't make you enjoy them even more.